The bell is rung, and another edition of the Icon Showdown Podcast is live for the first time. My co-host tonight is the amazing Josh Kirkland from Colorado. How are we doing today, Josh?
I'm good. I'm not amazing, but I'm good.
I think you're pretty amazing. I think you should take it back. You should big up yourself as much as possible. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Icon Showdown podcast, essentially we pit creative works against one another in a given year, and based on a certain criteria, we determine which should be considered the most iconic of that year, instead of the Academy or the Hollywood Press Association that will tell you who's the best of the year without telling you why. We're going to tell you why. That's why we're here today. So, we will be tackling the year 1991 in mainstream horror, pitting Popcorn against People Under the Stairs. Josh, had you seen either of these movies prior?
No, not till this week.
Neither had I, which I think is pretty interesting. In 1991, there's a considerable amount of sequels for some well-known properties, but there's very few original horror films from that year. So I was kind of excited to get to actually look at two that made the most money comparatively in terms of the original and see how they stacked up against one another. So how it works here is we're going to actually take a look at each in terms of its criteria, bopping back and forth. So we're going to start with Popcorn because Popcorn was released in February of 1991. People Under the Stairs was released that November. So considering that Popcorn came out first, let's take a look first at the antagonist or antagonists, perhaps in this case. What did you think of him?
I didn't see it coming. The big reveal. It's kind of caught me off guard.
I'm totally with you. I didn't see it coming either. Essentially, let's tell people what we're talking about here, because there was the red herring killer, who we are assuming is the father of the final girl, of our main lead, Maggie.
Even that,
Leonard Gates.
Right. Even his identity as her father isn't revealed until, late into the film.
That's a good point. Do you think it would have been a better film if they didn't do the switch and it turned out that he was still alive and it was him? Leonard and then Toby, we find out it's a student that goes to school with her whose family was killed when Leonard Gates does this ridiculous, essentially live snuff show when his movie that he made is kind of dejected by audiences. So he decides to kind of get back at audience by killing his own family in front of people. He tries to kill his daughter, but she gets away. So now she's kind of being haunted by his memory, both in his dreams, her dreams rather, as well as reality. And then we find out that there was a kid in that audience where a fire ultimately happened who was burned horribly, and that's Toby. What did you think about the burns?
I don't know. It was the makeup was more like there was a lot of metal on his face. You don't really think of a burn victim as having their face reconstructed with metal. Like little
right.
pieces of metal,
huge staples, right?
Yeah, staples, probably what it was.
I'm assuming he was burned so bad that the integrity of his skull was so weak that those staples had to be there in order to keep his skull in place. Because certainly around this time we got Freddy too, and he's also a burn victim. I found it interesting the way that this movie depicted a burn victim versus Freddy. Did you think the metal added or took away from kind of the fright factor?
I don't know. I don't know. I like when a movie does its own thing. And they have their own style of makeup, and it's different from anything else. If he looked like Freddy, it probably would have been not as well received in general.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And also, unlike Freddy, you could say that this guy is a little loonier. He's a little crazier, and like his head's not together. Like Freddy is more sadistic. This guy is more like affected and ruined by what happened to him, and he's more of a victim versus Freddy was sinister prior to getting burned.
Yeah, he does seem like kind of a space case. He's all over the place. Doesn't know what his next move is. Seemed like when he was talking, when he was, when we didn't know his identity and he was making his moves, it seemed like he knew what he was doing. But once you get to know him, get to see him as the villain, monologuing, it's clear that
there's a considerable amount of expo at the end of the film.
Yeah.
What do you think about his motivations? What would you say is his main motivation in ultimately trying to recreate what Leonard Gates failed doing years prior?
commit murder, but do it on a grand stage. That's why he did his little stage play at the end. And played to the audience. It's all.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think of revenge and also the lack of attention he got. Even when he was in disguise as Toby, going to school like a normal person, he was kind of a nerd, even when people couldn't see what was under there. You know what I mean? He's a film geek, and we'll get into the ensemble here in a second, but I don't think he's given the sort of attention that he wanted, and he demands it there at the end by essentially taking control of that theater for the Horror-thon in 1991.
Yeah.
Okay, what about his voice? Do you think Toby, as a performer, that voice, his character, was scary? We're talking about his kind of lunacy. Do you think it was effective? Were you menaced by his voice?
His real voice, the Toby voice.
Yeah.
I didn't find it menacing. It's a little goofy, a little
I
goofy
agree.
more than anything.
But you bring up a good point in that he was able to mimic the voices of pretty much everyone that he was disguised as throughout. He played multiple characters within the film crew. So
When he
I
did-
think
I'm sorry. When he did the voice of Tina, it didn't even sound like a female.
Tina was the exception. Tina was the exception, and that's when I really thought it was the dad because it was so half-hearted.
Right?
Moving her arms around like it reminded me of the Mr. Burns scene where they're moving his dead body when he's like on the puppet strings. Okay, what about originality? What about originality of this antagonist in Popcorn? Toby, essentially, is his name, who's ripping off Laynard Gates. He's imbued by the spirit of Laynard, not literally, but metaphorically speaking.
I'll give it. I'll give it points for originality. Mostly because as I mentioned before, didn't see it coming. That's something I always appreciate. In a suspense movie or a horror movie. Surprises. They go a long way with me.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty original too, and I like to think of them as there's two villains here. You have Laynard Gates, who I personally find is a more compelling villain than Toby, because you have this idea of a failed director wanting revenge on his audience to get more notability, or because he wasn't given the notability that he believed he deserved. I'm not sure. I know you're not a big Batman fan, but there's a character in Batman called Clayface, who is a kind of a actor who was huge, and then as he starts to not be able to get roles and not get the attention that he wants, he essentially becomes this clay monster that's able to look like anyone, similar to what Toby ends up doing too. So in terms of originality, I do feel like there was a lot of threads from the Batman's Clayface involved. And I also really like the notion of vanity and pride being a motivator to get revenge. It's kind of akin to what we see going on in the White House right now. This is not a political podcast at all, but I do feel like when somebody believes that they're the best or perfect, and others suggest otherwise, in a fragile mind, in a narcissistic mind, oftentimes as directors can be, that's going to be that much more troubling. And then in the case of Toby, I feel like we talked about he's damaged goods. I don't think it's super original, but the fact that his entire family was lost, he's kind of like if Batman himself went bad, right? He loses his family, and Batman loses his mom and dad outside of a theater. Toby loses them inside the theater. And then the gimmicks, his adoration of film, I found interesting. To have a film geek as a killer was fresh for that time. We'll see it again in Scream later, but this was years prior to Scream, 4 years prior to Scream. So I got to give it to Popcorn for really kind of going down this avenue first.
Yeah, agreed. And if we want to get into it, did Game of Thrones steal their faceless men?
Good call.
Stealing
you're
face?
absolutely right. That's a good point. That is very similar. What's that character's name? Can you remember from Game of Thrones?
Jaqen Hagar.
Okay, there you go. And I also thought Toby is fleshed out a little bit when we get to look at his apartment. He's kind of given a more stereotypical, obsessive serial killer vibe when you see all the stuff on the wall, and he's got pictures of his victims. Before we talk about what we each rated Toby / Laynard Gates as a combo as out of 4 pentagrams, let's talk about the big bads in People Under the Stairs, because there's kind of a lot.
In a way, it does boil down to, I think, just 2, but
I do think it's just 2. Of the 2, Mommy and Daddy, which one do you think was the bigger bad?
It's got to be Mommy, because Mommy is the only one that was, presented as scary. Like the movie didn't even take Daddy seriously. Like all his scenes were like comedy. It was like, that's where all the humorous scenes were Daddy scenes.
That's a good point. Yeah, I definitely think Daddy was less effective than a Mommy, and Mommy kind of or actually made him bow down to her a lot of the times until the end when things were getting a little shady and he actually hits Mommy for the first time. Where that was like the only role reversal where it seemed like he was kind of actually embracing his own masculinity. Compared to her, she was kind of ruling him the whole time. And we do learn that Mommy and Daddy are brother and sister too. That's something that's pretty significant. What are their motivations?
They're just sick in the head.
Okay. I definitely think they're deranged.
I had trouble, maybe just seeing what they can get away with. They like regularly interact with the police and like, just to flaunt like how much they can get away with, and like their whole house is set up, as to be able to do all that crazy stuff and have all the crazy stuff that's in it, but also, you can have guests over. They
That
have.
house is amazing. I can't wait to talk about that when we get to the settings part. But the house itself, you could argue, is a big bad because it enables them to do the horrific things that they do
Right.
in secret. I kind of went a little bit deeper there with the motivations. I do agree with you that they're deranged. They want to see I like that. They want to see what they can get away with, I think is interesting. And I think it's poignant to the racial stuff that we'll talk about later that's going on there. But I think the basic motivations, they want to hoard money. They want to control children. They want power. I think they're repressing their sexual desires for one another. I think they want to get on one another as brother and sister in a very weird way. And the only way to distract them from doing so is by overtly like using religion to kind of distract them from their own carnality for one another, and using religion and propriety, essentially properness, as a means of distracting themselves from their own sick desires beyond, because they got all the money in the world, right? And now they got this army of people that they've just used living in the basement. I think that's all kind of undercover stuff for their sick, incestuous desires. I don't know. Did you see that at all?
Yeah, I kind of assumed that they were giving in to those desires. I don't know. I mean, I guess they didn't have anything on screen, that show that they were, physically intimate. But I assumed it was there.
I think it's not there, and here's my reason why. Because he was lusting after Alice. To me, they definitely more than implied that he would have done horrible things to Alice given the opportunity, and I almost feel like she was into Alice too. So this is their one daughter who they haven't put in the basement yet. She's been following their rules and has been a good little girl compared to all the boys that have failed them and are now either living in the walls or stuck in this dungeon basement. What about the aesthetic of Mommy and Daddy? What did you think about the way they looked?
Um, I don't know. For some reason, I don't know. There's something about Mommy that I really liked. Just her whole demeanor and like just the whole look of her. Daddy, not so much. Especially
Yeah.
especially the gimp suit.
Okay, that's part of why I go to the motivation stuff, because that is so overtly sexual in nature. It's not like he's going to be protecting himself from bullets in this leather-clad suit that covers his entire body when he's holding a shotgun. I think we might be talking about like a baby-dicked guy here, right? That ultimately is going out and trying to get his jolly, and the shotgun being the phallus metaphor. We can get more into that later, but you're right. It was super weird when suddenly Daddy is in the gimp suit, a la Pulp Fiction, And I loved Mommy's look as well. I think she was like straight out of the 50s with the red hair all done up. It was like big, but it also looked tight at the same time. Like she was uptight, but like a big version of uptight. She kind of had that stereotypical housewife going on, but there was a strange sexuality to her, similar to how Daddy ultimately is kind of boring and conservative looking when he's not in the gimp suit, and then when he gets in the gimp costume, what the hell is he doing? Because to me, he's definitely getting some sort of sexual pleasure out of hunting down these kids. I don't know. That's kind of what I saw. What about their voices?
I don't know. I mean, they fit the characters, I think.
I think Mommy's voice was more affecting as a whole, especially when she's yelling at Alice toward the end, calling her a whore or whatever she's doing. It's so grating. She's really scary. I mean, we're talking about the ultimate witch here, you know?
Yeah.
Originality-wise, what did you think?
I mean, it was different from anything.
I think so.
Any scenario I've seen characters in. Different.
I mean, certainly in Texas Chainsaw, you kind of have an incestuous family, but I've never seen anything that focuses on a brother and sister that can't acknowledge their lust for one another. So they're repressed in that sense, and they use the children as the conduits to displace those abominable feelings. I think that is pretty original.
Yeah.
I also found them captivating. Granted, I found Mommy much more captivating, but when they were both on screen, I couldn't look away. I mean, they scared me. If I dealt with those people in real life, these are the type of people that scare me. And there's nothing supernatural about them.
I mean, in real life, I gotta be honest. You know, from like a horror movie standpoint, like I wasn't scared. They seemed almost like Disney villains. You know, where they're bad. They have like a lot of bad qualities, and they're up to bad things. But like, I really wasn't scared of them. You know, it didn't really evoke any kind of fear.
That's fair. I guess I don't know. I'm very scared of overtly religious people that try to convert you essentially to their belief systems. And granted, I'll acknowledge there is a cartoonish quality to them, a campy quality to them. But I feel like their inner sexual repression and then using Christianity to kind of combat that is scary to me, and it's something I've actually seen in real life, sort of thing. So that's the reason I give them a little extra credit. Let's really quick here. Out of 4 pentagrams, what would you give Popcorn's, Laynard, and Toby?
I wrote 3 on my list.
I wrote 3 too. I think it's a solid 3. What about Mommy and Daddy?
I also wrote 3.
As did I. We got 2 3s. It's like they're so good, but something is still missing, though. Something is missing. Let's talk about the ensemble of Popcorn. Specifically character developments. Do you feel like you got a good sense of this whole film crew and then the peripheral antagonists?
Yeah, I wouldn't say character development was, a suit, but I did love the characters. I did love the ensemble. I love the whole atmosphere, of the whole thing.
Was there too many characters? Would it have been more effective if they got rid of 2 people in the film club?
Not necessarily, or I don't know. Maybe more murders would have been the better thing to do. They got rid of them. Not.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there, because ultimately Cheryl survives and she's a peripheral character, as does Joni, right? So 2 of the girls die, and then ultimately you have, I think, every guy in the film club dies, doesn't he? Including the teacher,
Toby, and
Leon, the mad scientist guy, dies too, as far as I could tell. That one was a little more ambiguous about whether or not that smoke was going to kill him.
Yeah, he definitely died.
So all the guys are dead. I do like that they did that in terms of the ensemble, because usually the girls are all the ones that get slaughtered, with the exception of the final girl. But here we have 3 girls surviving.
Maybe that's what's striking me as off, because all the girls survived.
Did you believe any of the bonds between them, any of the friendships? What do you think about those?
Yeah, they did seem like a close-knit group. They seemed like they had like the kind of relationship you have with people you hang out with at film club with.
I agree. I definitely think that there was like an eclectic cast, and it wasn't just all nerds. You had people like Cheryl, who was kind of representing something different. She was super sassy, I guess you could put it. And the way that her and Joni interacted, I thought was interesting too, where she's like watching out for Joni's weight, and she's like, okay, don't put the butter on the popcorn, don't eat the Milky Way, rather. And then Joni comes back with her, I'm not putting butter on the popcorn, and I'm having a Diet Coke, so it all balances out. I like their relationship. Joni and Leon too. It's kind of weird, because Joni was like the friend to most of them. She seemed almost like the hub of friendship in a weird way. The girl who played the nurse in it. Did you buy into the fact that Tina was doing her teacher?
I was kind of confused at that part, because she said
I thought
she said it's starting to peel off, like she knew about the mask, but then she ended up dead, like right after that. So I was confused at that part.
Yeah, no, I think she thought it was the teacher that he was pretending to be, that Toby was pretending to be, and then when she kisses him, like she's sucking off the mask. I don't think she was conscious. I think she actually thought that was the teacher, who she was having an affair with.
Right at
Um,
that point, I figured it out, but just her commenting on his face peeling off, I didn't know what she thought that was actually what was actually happening there.
I think she said something about like your lip is peeling, like it was chapped, sort of thing. I don't think she saw it as something that was mask-like. I think she actually bought into it being like a human skin problem.
Oh, because
That's what I got.
yeah, because then they showed like his face, like his cheek was like peeling, like right after that. So I thought that's what she was talking about.
It was backstage. It was dark. She probably couldn't see that well. You gotta give Tina the benefit of the doubt. I wanted to see more of Tina. I thought she was fun, and we just didn't get enough of her.
Yeah, she was all right.
Played by Freddie Marie Simpson, I believe. Um, in terms of acting ability as a whole, was there any like really weak link for you?
Not really. Um,
What about the boyfriend? And what about the thug that takes the boyfriend's secondary girlfriend?
well, I mean that okay. Yeah, I mean it's such a minor role. I didn't think it was bad, but his voice was kind of high pitched for a guy who's supposed to be all intimidating.
Yes, that's a good point. When he's out in the lobby, yeah, he sounds a little too high in terms of his voice. I really enjoyed the lead. We'll talk more about her in Surviving Characters, but she seemed like this combination of Phoebe Cates meets Courtney Cox and a little pepper of Winona in there. There was something about her. I didn't think she was the best actress ever, specifically in scenes like in the projector room where I felt like she just had lines that didn't give her the ability to act right, where she had to be a little hammy about it. But I
Right.
thought when I did a little research on this, she was considered a odd choice for casting because they claim she has kind of a husky voice, and she was a recast too. Initially, the director who directed the three movies within the movies, Mosquito, the electroshock guy, and then the stench, he was supposed to direct the entirety of it, but he got replaced. When he got replaced, so did the girl who was initially supposed to play Maggie with this one. So you have a secondary director who's actually the one responsible for all the current day fodder, and there's another director who did the previous movies, the movies within the movies, which I found kind of interesting, especially considering the theme of the movie about a director who wasn't good enough, right?
Yeah. No, I did like those movies within the movie, but back to Maggie, I had no problem with the actress whatsoever. The character seemed like she figured stuff out a little too easily, and wasn't like as emotionally affected as maybe she should have been. You know,
Okay.
in that circumstance, like
Yeah,
she.
I could see that. Here's why I want to argue. I mean, that's kind of treading over the surviving character stuff I want to talk about with her, but she's so obsessed with film that I feel like she does look at stuff more analytically and she's not actually living her life. And she's looking at all the people in her life as characters, sort of thing, and the events that happened to her as potential scenes that she could write. So, in terms of that, I do think you're right. It might have been more satisfactory for us as an audience to see her be more affected. But considering her obsession with writing and characters, you can argue kind of made sense a little
Yeah,
bit.
maybe maybe she's just
What?
coping in a different way than most people would.
Yeah, I think she's a little disaffected in a way I've seen writers and people in performance do. Especially, it doesn't appear that she has a father figure. I don't. It doesn't seem like the aunt ever married a dude. The mother from ET, right?
Right.
So I don't know. Maybe she struggles with Mark in that relationship because of that. I don't know. We can't get too psychological into these characters, but there's something there. Um, I felt also like once Toby outs himself at the end in terms of the ensemble, his pain and suffering are decently acted. I think Toby does a better job once he's like out of the closet as the killer versus when he was Toby, before he was the mad Toby. I felt like he was a little too goofy. And granted, we did talk about his goofiness when he does become evil, but at least it made sense then. He doesn't have a skull that's connected.
I almost feel the opposite. I kind of liked him. I liked him at the beginning. I was like, oh, that guy's. I don't know. He just seemed really likable, and kind of
Fair.
he's like the Chandler of the group.
I see what you're saying. No, I get that. I do get that. What about the diversity? In terms of horror films, early 90s, did we get enough diversity here?
Eh, I don't know. Uh, didn't even cross my mind. I wasn't concerned about.
It was nice to see a character that was disabled. Bud was in the wheelchair, right? It was nice to see that. Frankly, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, for me, is like my favorite or the most scary horror film to me. And that's partly because there was a character in it that was immobile and gets hammered in the head. And it just seemed like he wasn't able to fight in the way others were. And granted, we'll talk about the kills. It wasn't my favorite kill with the Bud in the wheelchair, but I was happy that that was represented in it. And then, of course, Cheryl was a person of color as well, and I felt like she had a very robust character compared to maybe Joni or even
Yeah,
Tina. I feel like next to Maggie, Cheryl was probably my favorite of the female characters.
yeah, I can see that. I mean, I don't know. It seems like she had more speaking lines than like Joni did.
And that's interesting because let's talk about the ensemble of people under the stairs because you pointed this out to me last night. That same actress is in it. What was her name?
Oh, Kelly Joe Minter.
There you go. Kelly Jo Minter, not only in Popcorn in 1991, but later that year she's in another iconic horror film, People Under the Stairs, as the sister to Fool, whose full name was Poindexter. Is that a name? I just remember that from Toe Jam and Earl. I didn't know that Poindexter was a name.
I've heard it as in like an insult, like "nice going, Poindexter," or
As
what?
had I. If you
Or,
look it up on IMDb, his first name is Poindexter. So that
no,
was
I
a little
remember.
confusing to me.
I remember that from the movie. Yeah, like at the beginning.
So as a whole, the ensemble of People Under the Stairs, considering the secondary characters, what did you think as a whole?
As a whole, well, I mean, it really, the other characters who entered the house, Marcellus Wallace and the other guy,
Ving Rhames, also known as Leroy. His character's name was Leroy.
they just died really quick. They like really early, so it was pretty much just Fool on his own most of the time.
That's
Uh,
true. Fool always had like a sidekick. First started off with Leroy, played by Ving Rhames, and then he had Roach for a while, the son that was smart enough to get out of the basement and live in the walls, even though
well,
his
that's
tongue had been ripped off. Then you could argue that at the end, Alice is his sidekick. Fool always has somebody working with him, somebody that keeps him cooking because he almost met his death multiple times throughout. I personally think that the family of Fool was really interesting. I felt like the little we saw of each of them was decent enough where I really got a sense of their characters and they didn't feel stock to me. Did you feel that way? Like especially the grandpa?
no, I agree. I mean, yeah, it was very very limited. Their on screen time, but no, it was good. I did
Uh,
like the.
Another character that was super limited was Spencer. Um, and I really like the relationship between Leroy and Spencer. You have an interracial friendship here happening, not something that you see often in films. And their friendship was so strong that Ving Rhames then is willing to put himself at risk. Granted, he wants the gold coins, but to go see what the hell happened to his buddy Spencer.
I mean, that's part of it, but he was also saying I think that's the reason he went in is he was like suspecting Spencer of keeping the coins for him.
Oh, okay. So you
But
don't buy into their friendship as much? They didn't trust each other?
I mean, he definitely didn't in that moment. He wanted to go get those coins out of Spencer's hands, because he was certain that Spencer was taking them for himself.
That could be true. That could be true. I hadn't actually thought about that. In
Pretty
terms
much,
of go ahead. I'm sorry.
he pretty much says it outright right before they go in.
Oh, he's like he's not going to just get away with it. I see. I missed that. I must have missed that. I was hoping for the best, and apparently I blocked out the reality of their dynamic. What about Fool and Alice? Because we have a couple preteens here, right?
Yeah.
And the relationship was insinuated as sexualized from Daddy only, as far as I know. But really, it wasn't. There was no moment between the two where it felt creepy for me. Did it for you?
Not at all. Not at all.
Like I totally I liked their bond. I thought it was decent, and I don't know. Like he asks her specifically, "You've never seen a brother before?" And she didn't even understand the context of that. So I felt that was an interesting dynamic, an interesting relationship between those two that I haven't really seen. Certainly not up till then, up till 1991. Pre-teen, interracial, like non-sexualized friendship like that. Pretty
Yeah, it's
between
beautiful.
intersex too. Not just interracial. I thought it was good. Acting ability.
Uh, I mean, there every I don't know, maybe with the exception of I don't know. I was gonna say Ving Rhames maybe didn't have any cheesy parts, but he probably did too.
I felt like he was not the Marcellus Wallace quality in this one.
That's true. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, acting was on in parts, but little weak in other parts. But I think I don't know. I almost feel like this film is a lot lighter than like really light. Even Popcorn wasn't even that dark. But
That's fair. I mean, if you were to look at the lineup of 1991, I mean, as I've said actually for the last couple podcasts, horror was not the big business. If you were to look at who's making the money, I'm not sure either one of these made it in the top 100. Sequel horrors did that year, but you're just not making that sort of money. So I think you do have to oftentimes sell things as more of a comedy horror. And I see where you're coming from, but I don't think it's like a comedy horror like Shaun of the Dead is. I still feel like both of these are rooted in horror more than they are in comedy.
look at the poster for the people under the stairs. That looks way scarier than the movie was.
That's a really interesting point. You're absolutely right about that. When we get to personal connections and deeper meanings, I'm going to talk more about that. In terms of ensemble, I think in acting ability, Mommy and Daddy, like you said, were a little over the top, but I still really enjoyed it. And of course, diversity. What are we going to say about diversity in this ensemble?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last part. Say about diversity.
Diversity is one of the strong points of this, is it not?
The people under the stairs, absolutely. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, absolutely.
Specifically focuses on race relations and the mistreatment of minorities by white people who own land. I felt like it was doing something socially responsible in the way maybe Popcorn wasn't.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's rank them then. What would you give in terms of the ensemble for Popcorn, and what do you give People Under the Stairs?
Let's see what I wrote.
As you look it up, I'm going to let you know that I gave the Popcorn ensemble 3. Because I did really like the dynamic between like a group of a film club. I found them compelling.
I actually gave that one a 3.5 because
Wow.
I really liked it. Just like the whole setting, including the people involved.
And they really went all out putting together the horror-thon. You know what I mean? If I ever saw, like, because, I've taught at high schools multiple times, a club that was that into what they were doing and putting together such a show as the horror-thon they put on, you got to give them credit. That was a feat. What about the ensemble of People Under the Stairs? What are you giving that one?
I believe I give that a 2.5.
That's exactly what I gave it, a 2.5. So as it stands, Popcorn is in the lead by 0.5. Let's go back and talk about, fairly briefly, the surviving characters, because we've kind of talked about them a little bit, the surviving characters of Popcorn. What did you think about their means of escape? Ultimately, like the climactic moment when they are able to escape, how did you feel about that?
I did think that was a little lacking. Just, I don't know, you're talking about just the mosquito, the swinging in on the mosquito.
Yeah, I mean, we can go all the way back to Mark swinging in Indiana Jones style, right, down the zip line. And then, of course, that dislodges the mosquito, so it swoops down and it kills our villain, Toby, before he's able to kill Maggie. Why didn't that not work for you?
It just seemed too easy. I'm not saying it didn't work. It didn't impress.
I do know, I'm with you, and I will go as far as to say it didn't work specifically because I loved the idea of an audience not knowing that an actual kill was about to happen in front of their eyes and that they're actually rooting for it. I loved that. It was actually done a little bit more effective in Interview with a Vampire. But this was great because everyone's rooting for an actual death not knowing it. But then you have a mosquito kill a second person. There was nothing new about this kill. The mosquito had already killed the teacher. It was redundant. It was not effective because of that.
Maybe that's what it was. Maybe that. Uh, maybe subconsciously that's why I didn't buy into it as much.
Yeah, too repetitive. What about their determination to survive? Maggie and Mark specifically, let's consider them our final survivors.
I mean, kind of I touched on this with Maggie earlier. Like just emotionally, she didn't really seem emotionally affected. She didn't
Mm-hmm.
like. Didn't seem like a struggle. Didn't seem like she was. Like she had to fight. She was just there.
I'm kind of with you. She seems dead inside. And granted, we could talk about her family dynamics attributing to that. But she doesn't necessarily give up, but she is arguably too sympathetic of Toby's motives and plan. At one point, she says, "You're absolutely right." I don't know if she's just trying to like woo him, but I felt like she saw him as a great villain that she would be worthy of dying at the hands of almost, you know?
I mean, maybe. I mean, maybe. I mean, I don't know. She suddenly remembered all this repressed stuff. Maybe she's maybe been subconsciously, mulling this over the whole time, and that's why it's. I don't know. It doesn't seem believable to me, but maybe that's why it's not a shock to her. Maybe she's already processed it in some form.
Really quick, do you want to defend Mark's acting abilities? Because we kind of talked about it in the ensemble a little bit, but he was one of the final two, and he really was not one of my favorites.
I didn't mind him. I didn't think he was a great actor, but I didn't think he was that. I don't know. I didn't think he was like that big a character in the story. I mean, I guess ultimately in the end he was, but
That's fair. That's fair. Iconic status of the two. Maybe focusing more on Maggie, in the terms of like a Sydney from Scream or a Jodie, or I'm sorry, Laurie Strode from Halloween. These are these characters that transcend the movie themselves. They're almost as large a life as the bad guy. What did you think about Maggie in terms of her iconic status as a final girl?
I mean, I liked her. I didn't really have a lot of problems with the way with the way the actress portrayed Maggie.
Yeah,
Um,
I granted neither of us had heard of the movie prior to doing this, though, right?
right.
So there's a problem there in terms of iconic status because she hasn't transcended. But I do love the idea of a film geek, a horror screenwriter girl being a final girl. But whether she's going to last in my memory in the same way some of these other ones will, I'm going to remember the movie as a whole, but I don't know if she's as potent a character as the movie was potent as a whole.
No, I mean that's a good point. I wouldn't call her potent either. I just I think she's likable, but
I agree. I definitely enjoyed watching her. Surviving characters of People Under the Stairs. Let's talk specifically about Fool. The one child from the basement that we really focus on, the long-haired monster guy who ultimately like is able to escape. He's walking through the crowd as the money is pouring on people. And then of course Alice. I would say those are our three surviving characters. What did you think about the means of escape? That final climactic scene.
I mean that was fun. There's a lot more involved. A lot more led up to it than popcorn. Popcorn, it just seemed like just kind of it was resolved. Really
Right.
sudden. But people under the stairs, uh, I mean, it was built up and built up, and then it's just suspenseful. You think that something was going right for the heroes, and then it would go. It would be completely turned around.
True. Specifically, one of the moments that kind of bothered me was when Alice jumps down from the ceiling and attacks Mommy when she's at the stairs, when ultimately the entire community is showing up to, express their grievances. She could have bolted out the door after tackling Mommy from above, but instead, she just kind of like freezes there, almost to the point where we talk about the determination to survive. I felt like maybe Alice isn't ready for the real world, despite
That's true.
Fool.
I mean,
Did you
that's
see that? Did you find that a little odd?
well, maybe not. I mean, if you've never even been outside and you look outside and there's a crowd of how many hundreds of people, at least 300 to 500 people, maybe like right
That's a good
out
point.
there, you might not be super anxious to run in, into a just a crazy crowd, and you've probably never even seen a crowd of 10 people before.
So ironically, she thinks her chance of survival is amongst mommy and daddy versus the real world. Where who does she
Probably,
have? Is she gonna
probably
go live
was
in the slums with Fool? Where does she go?
probably wasn't a conscious thought. It's just instinctually. You
What
know,
do you think about Fool going back for her?
he's a fool. you know.
He is a fool, as preluded in the opening sequence when we get to see the tarot card read on his birthday, where he is, well, literally and figuratively, a fool. I do feel like he's too young to really know the sort of risk that he was taking. I don't think he necessarily. He's at that stage where he thinks he's Superman in a way. You know what I mean? He's not scared because he's been through so much as it is. Granted, this is especially emphasized when he nearly blows himself up at the end when taking out Daddy. Right? He was right there.
Yeah. Well, how would he
That
even know how to set the explosives up?
And I tell you what, one of my favorite moments, and I don't know how he ever would have thought of this, was the distractionary technique with the candle and putting coins in a candle. And as the candle actually gets shrinks, melts, like the coins would drop.
Yeah.
And to distracted Daddy, I love that. And what's interesting is he kind of got Daddy back because Daddy distracted him with that voice recorder of him and Mommy in the room that ultimately was able to surprise him with. But yeah, he's maybe he's too smart for his own good, and he's also simultaneously a little naive about some things. Iconic status in terms of these two. Let's talk specifically about Alice and Fool. Do you think they're more iconic than Maggie, or what do you think?
Fool probably is.
Yeah, I think, as we noted, just the significance of a young female, male, African American, Caucasian girl as your final figures, I feel like is kind of iconic. I'm going to remember them. I think they sufficiently kicked ass, both of them, too. The way that she's able to then traverse the walls, drop down on Mommy, climb up through the kitchen oven, the ventilation system above that. I think Alice and Fool both kind of like did it up proper.
Yeah.
So what do you give Popcorn? Surviving characters, what did you give them in terms of score?
I actually gave it a 2.
Oh, that's harsh. I gave Maggie a 3, and Mark to a lesser degree.
I'm sorry. We were just talking about people under the stairs. I gave my score for people under the stairs.
Oh, that's fine.
Popcorn, I gave it 3.
I gave Popcorn a 3. I gave People Under the Stairs, Surviving Characters, 2.5. And I almost feel like I should have bumped that up a little bit. I almost talked myself into a higher one, but I did initially put 2.5 for them.
Yeah,
Let's talk about the settings. Sorry, go ahead.
Can I go back to my score? I just wanted to explain a little bit. I like the characters, but the reason I put a 2 is because I wasn't scared for them at any point in the movie.
Okay. Yeah. No, I definitely see that. I mean, it's a foregone conclusion that they're going to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the characters, but I wasn't concerned for them. And this being a horror.
And Maggie could have easily died, especially if it was her dad after all. I feel like there was a good chance she was going to be toast. Knowing that this movie has never had a sequel before, I felt like you're absolutely right. In terms of the urgency, Popcorn had more.
Yeah, for sure.
What about the setting? Because I think both of them have phenomenal settings, if I'm honest with you. What did the mood of the Popcorn setting? Let's focus specifically on the movie theater.
That I love it. I love the setting and just like how wild the crowd is and how everybody's rambunctious, but they're having a great time and like nobody's leaving. Even when the lights go out, nobody's leaving. They're still, and like everybody's laughing at every bit of dialogue in these movies, and it just seems like, man, I wish I was there. I wish I was in that crowd.
No kidding. I think it's really interesting that this is we're talking about this on the day that Joker is released, and most movie theaters have put a ban on cosplay for Joker. You cannot show up to see Joker in cosplay. And here in this theater, you have these amazing, it's like Halloween, the way people are dressing up with these really unique costumes as well. The old-timey theater called Dreamland is appropriate too, given the dream she has at the beginning. The fact that it seems to be in Southern California, from what I can tell, which is where movies are predominantly made. Felt like that set a really interesting mood, just like a contextually appropriate setting more than anything, that allowed considerably variant shots too within a single location. You had the projector room, you had the concessions lobby, the theater itself behind the screen, and what I find significant in terms of meaning of the setting, it's a place where you go to see life magnified, right? The theater. Well, there is so much playing behind the scenes. All of the real scary shit, like the cinematic stuff, is happening everywhere but the main theater. You know, I found that kind of cool.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. And even these murders happening, before their eyes, it's all, to them, it's all part of the entertainment, and nothing's gonna stop their good time.
And after the second movie, there's then a mini reggae concert up in there as well. I mean, it did seem like it was a great time. Like you put, I said, I wish I was there. I would love to be part of this, as long as I didn't get murdered. It looks so fun.
Yeah, for sure.
And the utilization of the space is amazing. You had a strong sense of the whole theater. I feel like we got to see pretty much every room that would have been in a theater.
Yeah,
uniqueness of the setting.
I give it points for that. You don't see many movies that are 90%, inside of a movie theater.
I can only think of one around that time that came out that takes place a lot in a movie theater, and that's John Goodman's Matinee. I can't think of any other films that are so centrally hubbed within a movie theater. So I'd got to give that originality, uniqueness points for that for sure. I loved it. I did. I think it's going to be obvious what my score is for that one, but let's talk about the house and People Under the Stairs, the mansion, and of course you can talk about the slums as well. What did you feel like the mood that was set in People Under the Stairs?
It's like a Scooby-Doo cartoon, kinda, where, they're in, you never know what's going to pop out of the walls, you're being watched, it's kind of like that.
I think that's a great analogy. I didn't actually think about how much it is like a Scooby-Doo. Certainly the mansion is like stuck in the past. I found it creepy because she does have that 50s look, and then the house itself seems like it's in a time capsule. Doesn't look like a 1991 house, and then you have the contrast between the slums versus the mansion. You got the free but poor area of the slums where people are free and they can go around and do whatever they want. But then you have the rich people living in a prison, essentially. They're trapped within their affluence, which I thought was really neat in terms of the setting.
Yeah, not to mention, I got to give it credit for I've never in like a live action scene before seen like the stairs that like collapse into a slide. I've seen that in cartoons so many times, but they had like a practical version of that. I thought that was
great and used multiple times too.
Yeah.
One other spot that I want to mention within the house that I found really kind of super creepy was the kitchen. It just felt so sterile to me. I don't know if they're so rich, why do they not have a nicer kitchen than it? The kitchen just felt icky. I don't know why, but like a hospital kitchen or something. It gave me the willies more than any other room. The kitchen in that house gave me the willies.
Yeah, I agree. There was something a little off about it.
Certainly, we could argue that the utilization of the space is amazing. We go through the walls. We get to see the basement, the dungeon part of the basement. Maybe not the attic. We don't ever go into the attic, I don't think. But I feel like we saw multiple bedrooms on the second floor. Certainly the living room, certainly the kitchen, the outdoors as well. Great utilization of space. Uniqueness, what did you think?
Yeah, it's up there. I mean, I don't know. There's other movies with like haunted houses or haunted mansion, right. Just crazy houses. But there's something about the way that they manipulate it. Like they had just like so many trapdoors and stuff like that, and they used that to like manipulate the setting. I give it a lot of points for originality.
I'm with you on that one. And you mentioned there's been a lot of haunted house movies, but I felt this was kind of like an inverse of a haunted house movie where you have a concept here with the people in the house being the ghouls more than the ghouls living within the walls, right? It's the survivors that are living within the walls, and you got the ghouls living in the actual main space.
That's a good point. Yeah, and also like not really a haunted house, there's nothing actually supernatural about the movie at all.
Nothing supernatural about either of these movies, with one exception in Popcorn. Can you think of it? Because this is actually something when I was doing some research, people give Popcorn shit for because it doesn't make any sense at all, given all the other rules of the film. When the mom goes to the theater and then all of the letters on the marquee start popping off and then Possessor shows up. Is there any practical way that Toby could have done that?
See, I thought at first when I saw that scene, I thought that he was just moving into the mom's dreams, and because when I saw the note from her the next morning, I thought, oh, okay, the mom is gonna get in on this. But no, I mean, I guess she really went there and ended up trapped there. So I don't know. Yeah, you're right. That was a supernatural.
Strange moment. I mean, in theory, he could have been on the other side popping off the letters and then had a projector there that went through the white that said Possessor or something. But yeah, that's one of the flaws of Popcorn. So what'd you give Popcorn setting?
Oh, you know what I gave it? I gave it a 4.
4. I gave it a 4 too. I got to be honest. I gave People Under the Stairs a 4 as well.
I gave that one a 3.5.
All right. It's close. It's close. Now we get into my two favorite categories. We're going to start with deeper meanings. The deeper meanings of Popcorn, metaphorically, allegorically. Where did you go in your mind?
I didn't. Okay, yeah. I didn't really grab a whole lot of deeper meaning from it. With what's going on in Maggie's head, that's kind of where it would have. That's where it all would have been. But like I said, she didn't really seem real emotional about it. She seemed kind of unaffected. And so it didn't, I mean, if it didn't seem that deep to her, then, it didn't seem that deep to me because of that.
Yeah, I'm gonna mention something that I had to look up. I didn't actually realize this on my own because I think I didn't like the name of it. I don't like the name Popcorn. And then when I did a little bit of a research into it, it turns out that it was specifically named Popcorn because it's pointing to the degradation of dynamism in the early 90s of horror lore. A lot of the titles that came out that year were like The Crush, very simplistic. They didn't have the same sort of cachet as a Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Last House on the Left that were a little more specific and kind of had like an eeriness within the title itself, but it might have put off a masser audience. Popcorn was kind of like parodizing the fact that it's actually trying to appeal to a grander audience, and people are just going to the movies for the popcorn and not necessarily for the lore, the horror lore. And this is even emphasized further. This wasn't in the research, but you could see this mirrored through the gimmicks that they have to use to keep people there with the big mosquito, the 3D vision, the smellorama, and the electroshock seats. You're taking away from what the purity of cinema initially was. And certainly in the case of horror, you're getting more stock characters then and less depth to the story. So I do think it was actually satirizing what was happening with horror in the early 90s. And then
I'm not, now that you bring it up, I think maybe they could have come up with a better title.
I don't like the title. I don't like the title at all, but then it seems that it was conscious. But I think I wouldn't be excited to see a movie called Popcorn, honestly. Part of what drew me toward it is because it was alerted to me that this was a precursor of Scream, and I love Scream so much. I'm like, oh, crap, got to see that. And frankly, it is one of the movies that did better that year in terms of horror. I also would say in terms of deeper meanings. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just saying, Scream is a brilliant title. It's so like one syllable.
Yeah, Scream pulls off what Popcorn doesn't, but they're trying to do the same sort of thing, it would seem.
I heard recently that they were originally going to call it Scary Movie, and then they made Scary Movie the parody of Scream.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting. You could argue that this is also suggesting that horror movies corrupt the minds of those that watch it, be it Maggie always seeing everything that happens to her as a viable screenplay scene and not being able to connect to people because she is seeing them more as stock, hollowed characters. Makes her harder for her to relate with Mark, as we talked about before. And certainly it corrupts Toby. He's so obsessed with horror films himself that it gives him these ideas to actually take people out with. Do you remember 91 at all? Can you think of any commentary on the times?
Commentary on what?
On the times, like the year itself, or even the early 90s as a whole?
I mean, I just remember, I was 9 years old. I would have been in like third or fourth grade. third grade probably. I don't remember much outside of my little world.
Fair enough. And if I hadn't done a little bit of research, I would not have probably either. But in 1991, the U.S. announces a major nuclear cutback. That certainly relates to the mosquito aspect of it. You could also say that the Hubble telescope being launched for the first time in 1991 points to the widening scope and the trying to bring in a larger view, but then that negates you looking at the specificity and the humanness that you might otherwise if you were looking around the world versus like looking into space for something bigger that might not have meaning versus something smaller that has grander meaning, as the title, as we talked about, might be dealing with. Lasting impact, though, how does this live on?
How does what live on?
Popcorn. I mean, we talked about Scream. Certainly lives on through Scream. You got the scary voiced phone calls, right? That's pretty much Scream ripped that straight off.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could see Popcorn having a sequel. You know, that story could go a lot of places.
I would like to see it remade in a contemporary context with the way that
Yeah,
they're doing things with movie theaters now, with the rumble chairs and all that. I think it's rife for a remake.
yeah. But as far as influence, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm sure it's been influential to some writers and directors and all that, but I'd have to just pay attention from now on when I'm watching horror films, made after that. But
I think even beyond Scream 1, Scream 4 is really close to this one because that deals with a film class that is trying to understand the same sort of things as Film Club is. And maybe not putting on a horror-thon in the same way, but they're cognizant of what's going on, similar to how these characters are. Personal connections? I know you mentioned you were 9 at the time. Was there any other personal connections as you were watching it that made you like it more or less?
Popcorn, not really. I do have a personal connection to People Under the Stairs.
Okay. All right. If you want to, we can switch to that. I just wanted to mention, in terms of my personal connection to popcorn, as a kid, I didn't go to church on Sundays. I would go to the local movie theater. So I love this movie specifically because of where it was set. It's kind of like my religion. I mean, there was the local one, the Tivoli, which was like the cheap one. It was walkable. It was very much like this one. Granted, I did usually go to the Googleplex. So when we're talking about the dichotomy that's going on between the mass scale versus the mini, it spoke a lot to me. Plus, I related with Maggie. I did, as somebody who writes movies. I really related with her. But yeah, jump to the deeper meaning for you and personal connection to People Under the Stairs.
Oh, that's a smooth segue. No, I just remember there's this part where Fool, I think he was it was right after he found Spencer's body, and he hears a TV, and it sounds like, some kind of like TV show or movie. But then he turns it around, and it's like Gulf War Scud missile footage, like the missiles going into Baghdad. And I remember seeing that footage when, at the time when my mom was in Iraq. She got deployed to Iraq, and I just remember seeing that stuff on TV and just being like not knowing what to think. But it was like the same, the night vision, green night vision, probably some of the same footage I'd seen on the news at the time.
Damn.
But that was 91 was a couple of years later. I feel like that was more like 89 or 90.
Okay. But you still have that visceral connection to. That's funny because I can't even remember that moment. I don't know how it escaped me. I guess I wasn't as invested in what was going on in Iraq at that time as you obviously were. That's fascinating because the only thing I got in terms of personal connection, working at a video store, I would see that cover, and it gave me a much more demonic, supernatural feel that at the time I wasn't as into that, and I didn't really want to get into that headspace. And I think it may have misrepresented it, and had I known what it actually was, I might have been more interested in watching it at the time.
Totally misrepresented.
Yeah. No, the poster's scary. What about the metaphor? What's the metaphor, the allegory, the deeper meanings as a whole for People Under the Stairs?
I mean, unity, helping out people, helping people out. Just putting aside differences and working together for the better of the community, for the better of society. I mean, that's
you're right.
Pretty one.
Yeah, the disenfranchising of African Americans by specifically white bigoted people in power. Additionally, the corruption of youth and individual spirit, I feel like, by religion. I really felt like this was critical of religion because what I saw was it was denying the future of Alice specifically because she was so indoctrinated and thinking she couldn't say no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, to the point where she was completely censored as a person. Additionally, we have, I feel like it's a deeper meaning in that we have minority representation in a very positive light more often than not. Granted, Ving Rhames and Fool are both trying to steal from them, but in the end, I feel like the unity you mentioned is more important than that. What about lasting impact? Do you think People Under the Stairs goes on?
I mean, not necessarily. I don't know. It seems like it's pretty well wrapped up.
Yeah,
You know,
I'm with you.
as far as themes and deeper meanings, I was thinking, there is that whole tarot card aspect, the kid being named Fool, and everybody, telling him, oh, like look at the tarot card, this kid's about, or whoever's on the card. I don't remember what character it was. But he's about to walk off a cliff.
That's the Fool. That's the Fool card.
Yeah, and despite being warned about that, he's still making, fools rush in, he's still making rash decisions, but he somehow, comes out on top, despite being constantly warned about that his whole life. He's still making his own decisions and doing what he wants to do.
I like that interpretation. I think that goes back to when we were talking about how ultimately he's not smart enough to know what he's doing puts him in a vulnerable state. You know what I mean? He's very lucky that he is a fool because maybe if he was as conscious as Leroy, Ving Rhames' character, he would have met the same doom. But it is his kind of obliviousness that helps him as the fool make it through.
I don't know. I think the Leroy character was an even bigger fool. Like as soon as he decided to go in the house, like I thought, I didn't, he just starts smashing shit. And
Yes, he was brutish.
yeah.
Why do you think the dog went for Leroy instead of the kid?
Because
More menacing, just a bigger.
I mean, what would have happened if it had just been Fool standing there and Leroy didn't pop up, or like if he wasn't even in the room? Then I don't know. That's a good question.
I would argue he doesn't attack the kid because there's always kids in the house, right? He knows not to attack the kids because they're kidnapping children, and with the exception of Alice, it's always been young men. So maybe he knows not to attack young men, but he's never seen a ginormous Ving Rhames before, So
Good point. That makes sense.
okay, what was the point system that you gave him, or the point allotment rather?
Point allotment. We're starting with popcorn.
Yes, sir.
I gave that a 2.5.
Oh wow. Only because I have like such that personal connection to it. I gave it a 3.5. I found a lot of meaning there, and a lot of it, granted, was the personal connect. But then when I did do the research into the title stuff, I couldn't help but give it a 3.5. Deeper meaning for people?
It's also gonna have to be a 2.5.
I also gave that one a 3.5. I was digging deep. What can I say? Now we get to the money criteria, the fright factor. Certainly, when you think horror, you want to be scared, right? You don't go into a horror movie not wanting to be scared. When we talk about popcorn, we get a kill count of 7. What do you think about 7 deaths? Because something like The Blob has 27, something like Misery has 1. What do you think about 7 as a kill count number?
I mean, it's pretty weak, as far as horror movies go. But I mean, it was well done. It was the pacing of the murders was good, and like it always, I don't know, kind of kept the story moving along without just being focused on the killing.
Yeah, and I think it's actually a decent number because you actually care about the people that are getting killed in the way so many people in The Blob you don't care about. When there's 27 deaths, there's just sacrificial lambs. Here, for the most part, we get a sense of these characters before they die. What about the quality of kills in Popcorn? What were your favorites? Which one didn't work for you?
That'll ding it on a little bit. They weren't. I mean, I don't know. Was there any blood? I guess when the dude got the Mister, what's his name, Mister Davis,
Was
there's a
there
little
any
blood.
blood?
He
That's a
got
really good point.
he got impaled by the mosquito. There was a little bit of blood there.
And her mom, when she's killed by the possessor, in the movie version of the reality, right? There's blood on that sword that he sacrifices her with. But you're right. There is not a lot of blood in that. I hadn't thought about that. So what was your favorite kill? Which one was your least favorite?
I don't know. I guess if we're going for like most horrific, then when with Tina's face getting ripped.
Yes, when Tina starts kissing Toby essentially in the mask of the teacher, and it just gets like sucked off. It's
Yeah.
gruesome, and that's actually what I put as my scariest scene. But I do feel like it's undercut. That it wasn't really clear to me that she was strangled. They had a rope there, but it was like he was strangling himself, not her. I didn't really get that moment as much as I wanted to.
Oh, I didn't even get that she was strangled.
That's the sense that I got. What did you think about Leon's death in the bathroom?
With the poison gas.
Yeah, but before that, I found like kind of spooky incident where he pisses on Leon at the next to the stalls.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's those kind of moments that are like outside the box. That's almost so scary. Can you imagine if you were at a urinal and somebody just turned and started pissing on you? That to me was pretty spooky too. But the smoke bomb itself, not so much.
No.
Can you explain to me if that smoke bomb killed Leon? Wasn't the smoke being put into the audience supposed to be deadly? But then nobody died. I was confused by
That's
that.
what I was expecting to happen,
Yeah,
but
I didn't get that.
I don't think it did. I don't know. Yeah, I was expecting that to be a thing, like, because it's the same part of the movie. They're showing the poison that killed the dude, and then they're showing the gas being pumped.
Yeah, I wasn't clear on that. Why they focused so much on that when there wasn't a payoff. Okay, let's move over to People Under the Stairs fright factor. We have only 5 deaths, and that's including Mommy and Daddy. So there's even less deaths in People Under the Stairs. Granted, you could say that some of the boys' deaths, random shotgun shots that Daddy would just shoot into their dungeon area, could have killed people that we weren't aware of. But there wasn't a lot of death in this one. What about the quality of kills? Who had the best death?
Well, I mean, none of them were particularly outstanding.
Mommy's is the best. When they tear up through the stairs, and then they essentially chase her to the kitchen where she's about to kill Alice when Alice acknowledges the fact, you're not actually my mom. She's like, well, fine, then you're going to go to hell. And then all the people under the stairs, like wolves, surround her, and the insinuation is that she's getting eaten.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, they didn't show any of it though.
They did not show enough of it. I'm with you there. But the rest of them were gunshot kills, and of course, Daddy getting blown up. Kind of boring gunshot kills as a whole.
How did Spencer die? He the fool said he got scared to death because he turned white.
I don't know if Fool knows what he's talking about in the case of Spencer's death. But yeah, we do see him outside the dungeon cage. It looks like his hand was nibbled on a little bit. I'm assuming that Mommy might have poisoned him or something. I don't know. That's unclear. It's unclear how Spencer died. That is a good point. What about the scariest scene?
I don't even know, man. I wasn't scared at all.
I was a little freaked out. I was scared the most before I knew what the hell was going on in one of the opening scenes where the fork is on the ground. And it seems like the mommy's going to kill her in that moment. It's just like it felt like a very domestic terror, child abuse situation. That kind of got to me because I didn't know what the hell's going on.
It's very uncomfortable, but scary. No.
Fair enough. You got a strong constitution. Okay, in terms of point allotment for Fright Factor for popcorn, what'd you give it?
I gave that a 2.
I gave it 2.5. And in terms of Fright Factor for People Under the Stairs?
Give that a 1.5.
1.5. Okay, I'm going to bust up the calculator here. In terms of your total pentagram allotment for popcorn, what'd you give it?
Popcorn got a 17.
So 19 for me, plus 17. Popcorn has a 36. What is your total point allotment for People Under the Stairs?
15.5.
15.5 plus 18.5 for me. We have a winner! Popcorn is the most iconic horror film by a margin of 2.5 points, which is interesting. Yes, give it up for Popcorn. Because I had People Under the Stairs, my personal one was they had won it by 0.5. So you love Popcorn enough to swing the vote. And I think that's fair because Popcorn was awesome. And it really surprised me. So the bell has rung in terms of that. I want to thank Josh for being part of this podcast. Josh, do you want to big up anything? You want to tell people how to follow you on social media or tell them some projects you got cooking?
I don't really do the whole social media, but yeah, check out our album called They Would Know It Was Us, being released October 16th.
October 16th, Compudactyl's third album, ladies and gentlemen. You'll be able to find it where all music is found, Bandcamp, iTunes. So keep an eye out for that. We'll certainly have YouTube versions of it as well. But to keep this podcast alive and to keep Compudactyl cooking, we encourage you to purchase the album. That would be very lovely of us, lovely of you rather. And if you're interested in some unproduced music of ours that we're looking to get input on what should we put on album 4 and 5, you can go to compudactyl.com.
Unproduced, unfinished.
They're unfinished, but they got a lot of heart, and they're germs. And Compudactyl is it's a new kind of band where we like to hear what the audience has to say about the direction that we should take moving forward. Again, I want to thank Josh for being part of the 5th installment of the Icon Podcast Showdown, or the Icon Showdown Podcast. And as they say in the business, the bell has rung.